strong arm tactics that Mr. Trump uses. So you may be a really good friend of his, but if you're not doing what he wants you to, he can get very tough. He doesn't just have a conversation with Mr. Modi, he then proceeds to tell the world about it. And it's not always convenient, sometimes quite awkward. It's very clear that Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau didn't have a good relationship. Mr. Trudeau says it himself. He said in a speech earlier this year in January, he said that the first Trump 1.0 was not easy to deal with. Trump 2.0, if he comes to power, will not be easy to deal with either.
I'm in conversation with Suhasini Haidar, a seasoned journalist with over 2 decades of experience. As the diplomatic editor at The Hindu, she has written and reported extensively on geopolitical issues. She has been closely tracking the US elections and is someone who can tell us what Donald Trump's victory will mean for India and the world. Suhasini, thank you so much for speaking to Brut.
Thanks, Meg. It's always fun to be on.
Thank you. Will Trump 2.0 end citizenship by birth? And what would this mean really? What impact would it have for Indians who are awaiting green cards, students who are already in the US looking for jobs, hoping for jobs thereafter? What do you think the policy could in the coming months and years look like?
Well, Meg, I do have to say a lot of this, and I saw the report you were mentioning. Many of these are ideas that Trump is putting out. Whether he actually puts them into practice or not remains to be seen. Certainly the idea that an American can be an American just by being born in that country has always been a very powerful attraction for immigrants worldwide.
Right.
Many have thought the idea that they could go to America and by virtue of being born, their children would have the same rights as Americans already there was an extremely powerful idea. And I think when America sees itself as a nation of immigrants, it's because of this idea. Right. However, we can't be blind. India is the largest population in the world. We can't be blind to the idea that unless we create more opportunities for Indians within India, that Indians will be seen as not just the lawful immigrants going as engineers and doctors to the West, but will be seen in terms of these large illegal immigrant numbers as well. And there's been increasing concerns when the State Department comes out just before the elections and puts out a big press release saying, we have deported so many Indians back who were illegal immigrants who came to our borders and we just rejected them. I think that's a very negative message that's coming here, but we must actually appreciate where this is leading. The question you asked is exactly right. What are we likely to see in the coming months and years? This may not be about Trump alone. This may be about a general sense in the West that they don't want to see people coming through other channels. They want to only control the number of legal immigrants who come. India is also stepping up to the plate in a sense, signing these mobility agreements with these countries. But what they essentially mean is that your workforce that tries to go abroad as expats may be able to go abroad for a contract or for a certain period of time while they are working and filling those jobs in the West, in the US and in Europe, but they may not get the citizenship and their children may not get the citizenship by virtue of being born there. I don't know if Mr. Trump has actually made that decision. When he came to power the last time in Trump 1.0, he certainly cut down on the kind of rights that there were for H-1B spouses in particular. So he did tamper with some of those quotas and some of the kind of provisions for immigrants who were coming through. We also saw a real decline in the number of students wanting to go to America at the time because of this, the strict nature. There's every student who goes to the West also wants some time to work over there and get their work experience. And those were also curtailed and more strictly enforced. You're certainly likely to see that rhetoric in Trump 2.0. Okay. What he does in terms of actual laws will remain to be seen. But I don't think we are going back to a time when immigrants were, the whole idea of the Statue of Liberty opening her arms for the wretched and the meek of every other country to America. I don't think that America is coming back anytime soon.
I quickly want to also touch upon the other neighbor, this time for the US, and which is Canada. As you see, tensions, are still persistent between India and Canada. Where do we see the Trump administration handle this?
It's very clear that Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau didn't have a good relationship. Mr. Trudeau says it himself. He said in a speech earlier this year in January, he said that the first Trump 1.0 was not easy to deal with. Trump 2.0, if he comes to power, will not be easy to deal with either. That's certainly a relief for India. Because given the kind of position Mr. Trudeau has taken vis-a-vis India on the Niger case, and the kind of diplomatic war we've seen in the last few months, the expulsion of diplomats, including high commissioners, Canada's attempt to more or less charge Indian diplomats with being involved in a violent killing. Clearly, all these have been unacceptable to India, and we can see the tempers rising to the point where today India has suspended many of its consular services to people of Indian origin in Canada because they say the Canadian government is not helping us. I'm not sure how long this is going to go, because while the trial in the Niger case and whatever evidence Canada does have will emerge in the next few months, Canada is due for a general election, one which Mr. Trudeau is not likely to win, going by his polling figures right now. If that's the case, if there's a change in power in Ottawa, we're likely to see a better relationship with Mr. Trump, particularly if it is Mr. Trudeau's rival in the Conservative Party in Canada, Pierre Poilievre. He's certainly, their party and the Republicans have had a good relationship. So this may be actually one of the more transient problems from the Indian point of view, but certainly at the moment, it will bring India a certain amount of relief, because it has been concerning that every time Canada makes some very, very strong charges, including against the Indian Home Minister, Amit Shah, for being involved, we have not seen the US side push back. We've seen the US side consistently saying we are equally concerned about the charges made by Canada, and India should cooperate in this investigation. So I think Trump being there will at least ensure that the worry about the India-US relationship being affected by a bad relationship between India and Canada, that may not be the case.
Just one more question as far as the neighbors are concerned, and I'll shift gears, in which is Bangladesh. Do you think Trump will actually do anything about reports of Hindus being targeted in Canada and Bangladesh? Or do you think it was at this point in time poll rhetoric? How do you view this?
Well, to begin with, Mr. Trump's tweet on Diwali that really targeted the Bangladesh government had many messages in it, and I think you have to see that. One of his big donors has been the Hindu American Foundation, which has been taking up this issue quite strongly, quite apart from the Indian government itself expressing its concerns about the treatment of minorities in Bangladesh. So that's one part of the messaging, and I think Mr. Trump was also reaching out to Indian Americans with that particular statement, because while he does not speak in favor of immigration, he does not necessarily speak up for minorities, here he was speaking up for a minority in Bangladesh. But that's just one part of that messaging. The second part of the messaging is very personal, and it's about the new chief advisor to the interim government in Bangladesh, Professor Muhammad Yunus, because his connections with the democratic leadership have been very strong. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom when Mr. Biden was vice president, Mr. Obama was president. He has known the Clintons for a very long time, worked with the Clinton Foundation very closely. Even with President Biden, you saw a couple of months ago when he went to the US, very warm, very affectionate welcome for Mr. Yunus when he went to the US. And I think Mr. Trump is targeting him very particularly for that. He's been known to have said that he thought that Mr. Yunus was conspiring with his rivals in the Democratic Party. There's no question that this is a setback for the Bangladeshi interim regime, because they had gotten so much support from the US government when they came to power by ousting Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The US has in the last few months really been trying to shore up Bangladeshi economics and get its clearances from the World Bank and the IMF. So the first question is going to be, will that kind of support continue? The second, I think, is going to be personal about this government itself. Will the US now be joining those voices who are increasingly inside Bangladesh saying that an interim government can't last for long, that there must be an election? I think the BNP, the Bangladesh National Party, has really been hoping that there is an early election because they hope to win from it. And most other countries would also say that any regime, once it has stabilized the situation, should hand over to an elected regime, elected government. So I think that's possibly going to be the third message coming from Mr. Trump's tweet, if I'm not overreading what he meant to say over there, that his administration will take a different tack on Bangladesh, perhaps not as helpful to the government of the day, and perhaps pushing instead for an election to take place over there. Either way, it's not good news for those who are in position in Dhaka right now. And consequently, for India, which has been deeply distressed by the ouster of Prime Minister Hasina, has been deeply distressed by the attacks that also included her supporters in the minority Hindu community over there, and has been deeply distressed by the kind of way the new government, the interim government, has been encouraging other what are seen as anti-India groups in the political fray there. I think for India, again, this is going to not be the kind of setback it is for those in Dhaka.
Definitely tough times there. We see how that unfolds. I had to discuss Elon Musk, with you and what this means. In Mr. Trump's victory speech, he generously praised Musk, and he said, "We have a new star. A star is born, Elon. He's an amazing guy. He's a character. He's a special guy. He's a super genius." The question I wanted to ask you is, are we going to see Elon Musk in some official position in the US government? There have been hints in terms of sort of trimming, some of the fat and what he said he can bring to the table. But the more important one also is in terms of India. Are we going to see, him visiting India, finally investing? All of that is right now a big question mark, also to do with EVs, telecom. There's a lot at stake here. So how do you see this really vis-a-vis both Elon Musk, both vis-a-vis in the US playing an official government role, and of course what this means for India as far as Starlink is concerned?
Right. Firstly, that speech you quoted from of Mr. Trump when he spoke about Elon Musk, and a lot of praise over there for Mr. Musk, who's seen as one of the architects of Mr. Trump's win. What you were asking about, that whole social media campaign that helped Trump reach out to many more voters. The fact is that he also said in that speech that we don't appreciate our geniuses enough, that we don't do enough to include them in the structure. And I think that indicates a possible formal role for Elon Musk. Elon Musk himself, you may have seen, has tweeted a picture of himself walking in with his computer to the White House. So he's not putting any of that, not leaving it to the imagination. He's actually expressing where he sees himself. So I do think that there will be this kind of position for Elon Musk in particular, and for the companies he represents and he owns in the Trump scheme of things. Some of it may just be in terms of building more EVs in the US. I think there's no question that Mr. Musk is interested in India. The one thing that's been holding him back, and many say was the reason why he at the last minute cancelled his visit to India in April this year, even though the Prime Minister himself, Mr. Modi, had announced that Mr. Musk was coming. I think one of the reasons is he's been holding out for more tax concessions from the government. He wants the idea of a tax holiday while he sets up what will be a very cost-intensive industry in India for electric vehicles. That's not something he's been able to do. Will the fact that he now comes more or less as a kind of Trump tech czar to India actually put enough pressure on the Indian government to give him the kind of holidays he wants on taxes, but also other kind of tariff protections and investment protections that he wants? That's one. I think it's also part of the larger question of when it comes to business, when it comes to tariffs, when it comes in particular to non-tariff barriers. Mr. Trump has literally not held back in what he thinks of India. He's called India a serial abuser. He says, I love Mr. Modi. He's a magnificent man. He's a fabulous man. But India remains one of the world's biggest trade abusers. So I think one concern for India is going to be, is Mr. Musk going to come? And along with him, others also are going to come and expect tariffs to be cut. Because we know what Trump did in 1.0.
Right.
He put tariffs against India. He took a number of disputes to WTO. I think we had about 8 disputes at the WTO, which the Biden administration finally dealt with. And he has been persistently on separate issues like Harley-Davidson, like hydroxychloroquine, which he wanted the export ban removed. He's been very public about the way he says it. There's some irony to the fact that he says it on social media, and of course, Mr. Musk also runs Twitter. So whether we'll see more of that Trump, stream of consciousness coming through his social media handles in 2.0 is also going to be a concern for India, because he doesn't just have a conversation with Mr. Modi; he then proceeds to tell the world about it, and it's not always convenient, sometimes quite awkward. For the Indian government. So that's the second part of Mr. Musk's outflow here. The third is going to be the real searching questions about whether he's going to want to see India put more restrictions on Chinese companies, for example. We have seen, maybe through the back door or otherwise, BYD has made a big its presence felt in the Indian market now. Is the Musk coming to here going to make that difference? And if India does not actually open the doors and put out that red carpet welcome for Mr. Musk as he wants, will India then suffer? Will Mr. Musk go to neighboring countries, or will Mr. Trump actually come to his rescue? So I think the fact that these two men are so close and so intricately connected now with this campaign, I think is something that India will have to look at very closely and not assume that it's all for the good.
Right. And my last question, of course, is on Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Trump. They've shared a good relationship in his earlier term as well. What do you think, as far as their relationship is concerned, that we will see could be some issues that could be testing, and some issues which finally resolve? Of course, like you've already mentioned, on China, on Bangladesh, it could be a sort of a boost that the current government gets. But where do you sort of see that pan out in the coming year?
I think it's so evident that the personal bonhomie between the two men is great. That we saw even when Prime Minister Modi tweeted, within a couple of hours of that, he had spoken to Mr. Trump on the telephone. He had tweeted himself about that conversation. There were two readouts put out for the public on how that conversation went. I think that it's very clear that New Delhi would like to hit the floor running with Mr. Trump and make it clear that they have no daylight between them, that the two men are such good friends, that the two policies will also be aligned in that way. But I think there is a pause over here that should be taken to remember the negative side of what happened when you had this kind of closeness with Trump 1.0. The first, as I just pointed out, is that he can have a conversation with you and then go to Twitter and talk about it. He did that on China, where he said, I've just spoken to Mr. Modi, and he's in a bad mood about what's happened with the Chinese incursions. That was not a message India wanted to put out. It was a sensitive negotiation with China. So that can be a kind of worry. He, at one point, what I can only say is, imagined a conversation with Mr. Modi where Mr. Modi, he said, had asked him to mediate in the Kashmir dispute. And obviously, that's not a message that New Delhi would want to send out. So that's one part of the worry. The second is on the strong arm tactics that Mr. Trump uses. So you may be a really good friend of his, but if you're not doing what he wants you to, he can get very tough. And India saw it when it came to his almost farman or diktat that India must zero out all of its oil purchases from Iran and Venezuela. And Iran at that time used to produce 12% of India's imports came from Iran. It was much cheaper oil, much sweeter crude, much better for Indian refineries. And yet, Mr. Trump put threat after threat on India until finally the Modi government said, okay, and zeroed out. If you notice, India did not do that when it came to the Biden administration demanding the same kind of cuts on Russian oil.
Right.
So there's a lesson to be learned in there, whether India will have to go back to that old dealing with Mr. Trump and his sometimes impossible demands and deal with that. The third is, as I said earlier, this idea Mr. Trump has that every partner has to give to the relationship. It's not enough for you to expect that in return for friendship that America will do a bunch of things for you. Remember, one of the first few things Mr. Trump did in 1.0 is cancel any kind of aid that the Obama administration had promised India for climate change transitions.
Right.
It was a big blow for India at the time. Now, if he is to do that again, all the agreements that have been signed in the Biden administration, there's a considerable amount. Mr. Modi went there last year for this very successful conversation on a state visit that Mr. Modi went there for. Will there be a reversal of any of those? It remains to be seen. Will Mr. Trump want to forward any of the agreements made with the Biden administration? That remains to be seen. As I said, the place where India can feel comfortable is one, in the comfort of the relationship itself, what you mentioned, personal relationship. The second, there will be constant back and forths, and Mr. Trump is due now in India for the Quad Summit in 2025. So fairly soon you will see a Trump visit to India, if all goes well. And the third is going to be the lack of American noise, if you like, the background noise that comes on democracy in decline, media freedoms, NGOs, minority rights, that kind of noise that the Democrat administration always brings with it, and the Biden administration also did, as well as on this case involving Mr. Parveen Nijjar, the Khalistani activist. You're likely to see India feeling much more comfortable and the Modi government feeling much more comfortable on that count.
Right. Suhasini Haidar, eloquent and with gravitas as always. Thank you so much for speaking to Brut.